it's important that we realize or recognize or even be able to somewhat identify when it starts, when it ends, and who are the key players. But for our purposes for studying the book of Revelation, and I don't want to disappoint you with this, it's actually not as important that you know when it started per se, even when it ended, but knowing how it's going to impact us in our present day, given the fact that, historically speaking, Daniel has come and gone, the Messiah has come and gone, yet he's going to come again. And so there's still a tribulation period that is likely to happen. If you think it all happened before, well, then that's why we need to pay careful attention to the preterist versus the futurist. Those are the parts that I think have the most bang for your buck because of the way they impact your theology and the way you live your life today. For instance, let me say it this way. If you believe that all of Daniel's 70 weeks has already come and gone, like the preterists say, the hyper-preterists or the full-blown preterists, then you're going to live your life in such a way that you're not really worried about what's coming around the corner per se, because you're not looking for some coming Antichrist and a tribulation and a 70th week of Daniel, et cetera, et cetera. So it's going to impact the way you study your Bible and the way you, live your life as a Christian. On the other hand, on the flip side, if you are a futurist, like I am, then you're going to be intensely studying the book of Daniel, like we're going to be doing tonight, with a view towards the book of Revelation, with a view towards things that are still around the corner, and you're going to be conducting your life as a Christian in a manner to be preparing yourself, you and your family, your friends, your loved ones, for the coming persecution from Antichrist and the trouble that's going to be hit planet Earth in the future. Those types of things. So I'm not going to get twisted around when does the 70 week starts? When does it end? There's like 5 different possibilities of when it could have started. And that, of course, impacts when it ends and things like that. So, excuse me. So let's study with kind of a, keep the majors, major on the majors and minor on the minors. All right, so here's a chart again, Daniel 70 week. You can see on the chart by the colors. Some of the main things on the chart, reading from left to right, are that there are 70 weeks, which are represented by 490 years, and they're broken up into 49 years, and then 430 years, and then 7 years, and you can see on the screen. And there's the beginning over on the far left at 445 BC with Nehemiah chapter 2, according to this chart. And then you can see the 7 times 7 years, 49 years, and then right after that, there's the 62 times 7, which is 434, and those two add up to 483. And then you can see the cross of Christ there, and then there's a pink slice called the church age. That would represent what we're going to call the gap between the 69 weeks of Daniel and the 70th week of Daniel, the final 7-year time period. And then according to this chart, which is clearly pre-trib, pre-millennial, pre-trib refers to the rapture of Christ happening prior to the tribulation, 7-year period that people refer to as tribulation. So you can see the little arrow pointing up at the rapture. At the beginning of that slice in the middle where it's called the red, that little red square, the bright red, the tribulation, the 7-year period, 1 times 7 equals 7, which is broken up into 3.5, 3.5. Pre-trib says we are going to be raptured prior to the tribulation, the 7-year tribulation. I don't agree with that view, but just for the sake of this chart, that's the only part I disagree with in this view per se. The rest of the chart is fairly right on the money as far as I can tell. And then when we say pre-millennium, we're talking about Christ's second coming, not the rapture, but Christ's second coming happening prior to the millennial age, which is 1,000 years, shown on your screen in kind of a, I guess that's a teal color, aqua colored, light bluish kind of, light green kind of, second coming and Armageddon, and then the kingdom age for 1,000 years. And then after the kingdom age for 1,000 years, we have the great white throne judgment of Revelation chapter 20, which ushers in the new heaven and the new earth. And that's it. That's this chart. By the way, again, my perspective is that this chart is fairly right on the money. The thing I disagree with is the pre-trib rapture. I hold to a pre-wrath, meaning the rapture is sometime in the middle of the second half of the 70th week, about 3/4 of the way in. And also the date on the far left that says 445. I think that 445 really is the date that most people should latch onto, but there's another date in the 573 or something like that. I'll have to look at 563, something like that, where there's a decree that Artaxerxes also puts in writing that I think is worth looking at. We'll look at that in a moment. Here's another chart of the same thing. 70 weeks rightly divided. This time it's important to see that the 70 weeks is broken up into 3 sections. And Daniel himself gives us its breakdown. 7 weeks, and then followed by 62 weeks, and then followed by 1 week, which equals 490 weeks. How we factor this into being years is a little bit of just simply common sense as well as context, right? If this were simply really literal weeks, when we talk about 490 weeks, 70 times 7, 77s, then we'd really be looking at a time period that's a little over like a year and a half or something, a little like a year and a third or something. It wouldn't be very much time, right? 490 weeks, if they were literal weeks. All of the details of what should take place really just honestly couldn't take place in that short amount of time. So thus we know that this is symbolic of years. And the proof is really that we're going to see that contextually it must be years, as well as the context from the Hebrew culture, which already had this idea of 77s when it talks about years of sabbatical years and jubilee years and things like that. So again, same chart, just a different kind of a slice, a look. We'll return to these charts in a moment. Here we have another chart. Let me see if I can blow that up a little bit. Yeah, that works. Daniel 70 weeks, again, same thing, reading from left to right. We have the prophecy that's given to Daniel, which includes 69 weeks, which is broken up into 7 weeks and 62 weeks, but 49 years and 434 years, respectively. Then we have the church age current gap in the middle there. And then we have the final 1 week sitting off to the far right, which is itself is broken up to 3.5 and 3.5 years, right? We'll look at these in time. Let's look at one more chart. This one is Daniel's 70 weeks as seen through the lens of the preterist. The other ones that we looked at were more futurist views, but this is definitely a preterist perspective. All 70 weeks, all 490 years are contained between the years 455 BC and 36 AD. So that's the preterist perspective. All of it's in the past from our perspective in the year 2023. And you can see it's still broken up into the 3 parts of 7 weeks, followed by 62 weeks, followed by 1 week. That part, the preterist and the futurist agree on. And I think that's solid Bible interpretation, along with the fact that the 490 is representative of years and not merely weeks, like 7-day week cycle. It's actually years. The preterists and the futurists both agree. What you're going to find, I'll say this over and over again, but it's worth reiterating, there are parts of the preterist perspective that are worth holding on to. It's because of the near-far prophetic telescoping aspect. Parts of the prophecy have been fulfilled in the first century and fit within the first century perspective, meaning part of what preterism is bringing to the table is worth listening to. It's accurate. But it's not necessary to go full-blown hyper-preterism and throw everything into the AD 70 time frame in order to make the prophecy make sense. Indeed, there are parts of preterist perspective that absolutely, I think, are damaging to the biblical text, and even in the hyper-preterist camp are even borderline heretical. We'll get into those maybe in a different day, a different study, an excursus study on this topic. But I wanted you to see this first, that the preterists have this breakdown for their time frames. And then one final image, then I'll jump right into the study, is, and this is, remember, I looked at a lot of these images a few weeks back during my preview version of Daniel 70 Weeks, but I was listening to this study, watching this YouTube video for the last few weeks from a Christian author, YouTuber by the name of Alan Parr. That's his picture you can see on the screen there. I think he looks a lot like me, or I think I look like a lot like him. We resemble one another, in my opinion. If you've seen what I look like, and you see what Alan Parr looks like, I think we look alike. We both look like Denzel Washington is the point. All 3 of us look alike, right? You get Alan Parr, Ariel Hanavi, and Denzel Washington in a room, and we look like 3 brothers having a reunion. All right, just a little bit of humor there. So I'm subscribed to Alan Parr's YouTube channel. Great channel. I'm giving you a little plug for it right now. It's called The Beat, B-E-A-T, Biblical Encouragement and Truth, B-E-A-T. And he did a study on the book of Daniel in 90 minutes, right? Great live stream study. I can't really top his study. I agree with nearly everything he says. Most of the details I agree with. And here he's got Daniel 70 weeks broken down, just like we've been looking at. His starting point's a little different. Notice he doesn't have 445 BC like in Nehemiah. Instead, he has 457. That's the date I was talking about earlier. And I think this is actually the technical date for the decree as is issued from Artaxerxes himself in 457. But then Nehemiah picks up on that decree and receives a letter from Artaxerxes to simply go and rebuild the wall in Jerusalem and things like that. Because of the language about rebuilding Jerusalem and the wall, most Bible prophecy students opt for the 445 or 444 date instead of the 457, like 12 years earlier. But if you think about it, there's only 12-year difference between the actual decree in 457 and the letter that was given to Nehemiah in 445, 444-ish. Let's go with 444, just to keep it at 12 years. So Alan Parr goes with the 457, but all this does is affect really the end, what we call the terminus ad quo. I'm sorry, the terminus ad quem. That's the ending point. The beginning would be the terminus a quo. So the terminus ad quem, the ending point of the 483 years. The only difference between the 457 starting point and the 444 starting point is that 12-year difference, which affects either the date of the beginning of Jesus' ministry in 27 AD as the ending, or his riding into Jerusalem or being hung on the cross a few years later. That's really sliding the scale. I mean, that's minor, 12 years. That's a little bit of fudge room that we can go with, given the fact that it's difficult to pinpoint exactly when ancient calendars start and end based on the lack of historical records to know. So, but this is another helpful chart. We'll turn to this over and over again. He's got all the main pieces on there. The rebuilding of Jerusalem in the 49 years, the 430 years of leading up to the coming of the Messiah, the Prince. And then he's got the prophetic gap that I agree with that must be there. And then we've got the final 7 years sitting apart from the previous 483. And of course, in Alan Parr's estimation, the tribulation is 7 full years long. He doesn't even put the rapture at the beginning. I'm sure he is a pre-tribber, though. He does put the second advent of the Messiah at the far end of the 7 years, which is exactly where it belongs. All right, so we've got about 25 minutes left. So we're about halfway through this first hour of our study. You're listening to Eschatology, a biblical study of end-time events. My name is Ari Ben Lyman Hanavi. Let's jump now into the study proper, now that we've kind of prepped ourselves with all these charts and background material. Oops, sorry, one more chart. Looking at just the 70th week itself, not the 483 years, part of the 490, not the larger chunk, but the last 70th week itself, which we will get to in time. This chart shows the beginning, right, the terminus a quo, the beginning of the counting at 444 BC. Again, remember, there's just a 12-year difference from what I understand is the actual decree of Artaxerxes in his second year that's recorded for us in the Bible, and where it actually has a decree. And there even is language about Artaxerxes saying, hey, let's stop the building for a little bit and let it not start up again. Speaking of Jerusalem and the temple, let's not let it start up again until I decree it so, right? Artaxerxes is this Persian ruler who's calling the shots. And so during this time of getting everything set up, we've got a lot of people that show up on the scene. There's Cyrus at the very beginning, that's spoken of in the book of Isaiah. And then we've got Artaxerxes who shows up. We've got Ezra, who's one of the key players. Then we've got Nehemiah, who's one of the key players. But by the time we get to Nehemiah and the year 444 and Artaxerxes and the letter that Artaxerxes gives Nehemiah that we read about in the book of Nehemiah, at that point in time, Isaiah is sent to build the temple and the wall. I'm sorry, not the temple, the city and the walls. And at that point in time, there are no more decrees that are issued. So technically, if you pick the 457 date, like Alan Parr does, or you pick the 444 date that many premillennials do, like I do as well. It doesn't really matter. There's only a 12-year difference between those, and so that's enough wiggle room for us to stay in the same room. It's only until you pick like say the Cyrus date, which is way farther down the road, almost 80 years earlier, like people like Chris White, that you really begin to make some serious changes to the dates here. But when we look at the 70th week of Daniel, and actually, you know what? This is the same basic chart. I was going to say this is focusing only on the 70th week, but this is the same basic chart. You got 7 weeks with 49 years, 62 weeks with 434, a gap. Messiah is cut off at 3380. Those time frames, again, it could either be 27, or as early as 27, or as later as 33, something to that effect. Church age gap in the middle, and then the final 70 years sitting apart from it. And again, I believe the gap must be here for a significant reason that I will detail as we get into the study. Because I know that there are some, like again, the preterists say there's no gap. But then they have to explain what is meant by the times of the Gentiles and the church age that we currently live on. And I guess, what do we do with all the details of Revelation where the mark of the beast supposedly has come and gone. The tribulation is supposedly come and gone. The Antichrist is supposedly already come and gone and cast into the lake of fire already. The millennial kingdom is supposedly come and gone. The great white throne judgment is come and gone. I mean, there are a lot of really difficult topics in the book of Revelation that the full-blown preterists, hyper-preterists, have to contend with, that I think push it into the danger zone. All right, let's jump into the study. Daniel chapter 9, verses 24, 25, 26, and 27. I'll read the passages first. I'm not going to read the Hebrew on the right side of your screen, but I've got it there just in case I need to reference a few words in there. Okay, let's read this first. Here's what Daniel has to say. This is the NASB version of your Bible. 70 weeks have been decreed for your people and your holy city, to finish the transgression, to make an end of sin, to make atonement for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy place. Verse 25, so you are to know and discern that from the issuing of a decree, right, there's the word decree, which in the Hebrew is actually just the word, right? From the issuing of a word, mean matzah davar, right? The Hebrew word over, is just the word davar, which is a spoken, but it carries the weight of an official decree, which is why prophecy students think that the word decree is really the best way to interpret it in this particular context. But know and discern that from the issuing of the word, literally, but the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem, which is key, because it talks about Jerusalem, but the context includes the temple, because we're going to talk about the defiling of it in the next few wordings, next few parts of the prophecy. But from the issuing of the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince, there will be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. It will be built again with plaza, moat, and even in times of distress. Yes, I'm aware there are differences of opinion between who this Messiah is or who he isn't. We'll deal with that later. Verse 26, then after the 62 weeks, the Messiah will be cut off and have nothing, and the people of the prince who is to come will destroy the city and the sanctuary, and its end will come with a flood. Even to the end, there will be war. Desolations are determined. All right. Let's keep reading. Verse 27. Here's where things get really challenging because of the near-far aspects of prophecy, because of the fourth beast of Daniel chapter 7, and because of the fourth metal, the bronze in the statue, where there's this now and not aspect of the bronze and a now and not yet aspect of the beast, the fourth beast. We now encounter in verse 27 this kind of now and not yet aspect of this person who is a prince or a ruler or an anointed one or something like that. It suddenly says in verse 27, he will make a firm covenant. And you have to ask yourself, who's the he, right? How many individuals have been mentioned in this prophecy? We'll look at that in a moment. But for now, let's keep reading. He'll make a firm covenant with the many for 1 week. This, by the way, is in my opinion, is one of the easiest way to ascertain why the last 70th week of Daniel is a full week and not just merely 3.5 years like are spoken of in other parts of the Bible, because it says he'll make a firm covenant with the many for 1 week, but then it says, but in the middle of the week, he'll put a stop to sacrifice and grain offering. So it's definitely a week, right? From a number of contextual clues. Number one, all of the other weeks have been full 7-year time frames. The 7 times 7s, right? The 49 years, and the 7 times the 62, the other part of the prophecy, the 463, I believe, that we looked at earlier. Those have all been full units of 7, multiplied. So it makes sense that this must be, in order for it to fit the 77s, the 490, it must be a full 7-year time period as well. It can't simply be 3.5. There's some debate whether or not the 3.5 is split, right? Where there's a time gap between the 3.5 one part and 3.5 the other. I think that's a very weak position to go with, although there's a possibility. I don't think it's a probability. Number one, this individual makes a covenant for a week, so that seems to suggest a single unit. He doesn't say he makes a covenant for 3.5 years. He makes a covenant for 1 week. And then the second thing is that he, in the middle of this week, he breaks his word. He puts in his stop to sacrifice and grain offering, and things like that. And we'll read about this a little later on as well. Daniel chapter 10, 11, and 12, as well as Revelation, fill in some more details about this midpoint event, which is very, very significant. So just kind of perk your ears up for that, about the middle of the week event, middle of the 70th week. We're going to zero in on that in later studies.